Hey, this is Jelle, growing bonsai, and today I'm looking at sacrifice branches and why I am wiring these out. Don't think of sacrifice branches as something that you're going to throw away. Why should you always wire out your sacrifice branches? You know, in a lot of videos on YouTube you see people and they take thick branches, thick wire, and with a lot of force they try to push a trunk into shape and they get this nice undulating shape. Well, if the branch doesn't break and if they can actually get the shape in their tree trunks. I don't do that. I try to avoid that at all cost. And there is a couple of routes in which you can actually avoid it. Well, first of all, you can just cut back your tree, let a new side branch grow out in a different direction, and you also get movement. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about sacrifice branches. Sacrifice branches I use to create new trees. Female bonsai trunk are characterized by smooth, gentle curves, just like this one. Question is, of course, how do you get these curves into a trunk? Well, it is quite easy. You have to be very young to do this. Well, in fact, not you. The tree has to be very young. If you look at branches like this is all current year's growth, and actually I'm already late in the season. It is now early August and I've not gotten around to wiring this one out. This young stage, however, is the time that you need to wire it out. Better is yet, very late spring, as these branches are extending, you straight away wire out the branch and you give them a nice gentle shape. Now early in the year, say late spring, this has not lignified. And lignified is the process where the softer tissue becomes woody. It's that point that the tree gets more breakable. So basically getting smooth curves into a branch requires you to be very early. It allows me to create trunks with a nice shape, soft movement, little twists and turns in a fairly rapid manner. Basically, you just create the shape that you want for your trunk, you wait for a year, you layer the branch off, and you've got yourself a new tree. That of course then needs to grow out and fatten up, and I know you've seen the video on how to fatten up trunks, but basically this is how you can set the first shape of your trunk. In fact, you can leave the sacrifice branch on for another year or 2 or 3 and it fattens up considerably and you already have a good trunk. So no, I am not a big fan of taking heavy wire, heavy force on big trunks. Now what you see happening if people forget to wire early on is that you get a very straight trunk at the base and then all of a sudden the movement starts, and that's basically because the lower part is hard to bend when you don't do it young. That's what I've done with this one. This is a cutting. It was about this size when I first rooted it a few years ago, and as this side branch came out I wired it out straight away into this very nice gentle shape. You can see this shape is now not nice in line with the lower trunk, so I'm going to layer this off. Now by doing it on your sacrifice branch and I would layer here, I've got movement in my trunk straight away from the start. And that will of course make a more interesting bonsai. Now here it is not a big problem because this is going to be a trunk line going up here. One of the reasons why you develop a cork bark maple from a cutting and you don't graft it onto a regular green maple is what you see here. The corking of the lower trunk extends straight away all the way into the roots, and with that you get a much better tree. Here of course I haven't worked the roots all that well because here there's no real roots forming and I need to cover this up further so that more roots can develop. Here you see these tiny little roots, they have dried out. That's not good, so I'm going to add a bit of substrate here so that this develops better as well over the next years. The root base has been completely covered now. I know you don't see the nabari, which is not all that nice, but it is much better for developing the root spread. Now for trees that are of a special variety like this Arakawa, it really pays to think forward. Now how do you know that this is an Arakawa maple? Already by looking at this trunk, you see that Arakawa has the tiny little white spots marking the green bark, and everywhere where there's a little bit of damage you see, there's bark forming. This is typical for an Arakawa maple, and here actually at the base you can see this is a little bit older. This is already developing the bark. It really pays to think forward. So What I mean with that is you can say, well, this is going to be my next trunk line, so this is going to be the tree, and everything else is going to be cut off. So I don't really need to think about it, but here is the crux. If you instead think of a sacrifice branch as something that you're going to use later on, then this tree is actually full of opportunities for new trees. And that's why you'll see that I've wired out all these long branches. I still need to do this one. I might wire out these two, because later on you can air layer all of these off, and then you have new trees for your garden. So this is a way to very quickly expand your collection. You have one good species, or actually one good variety, a cork bark Japanese maple. You're growing it out, and as you are letting sacrifice branches grow to fatten up the lower trunk, you wire these out. Then after wiring them out, they'll set over winter, and in early spring you can layer them, and then you have new plants. That way this tree will result in one cutting, a main trunk, a second plant, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh. You might have 8 or 9 plants out of this tree within the first 2 or 3 years of growing it out. Now you can imagine I can layer it off next year, but I can also say I'm going to layer it off in 2 years or 3 years and let this grow into this size first, or maybe even thicker. So that way you can already develop your small bonsai on the main tree. This really increases the speed of development of bonsai. You don't have to start with a single cutting or a single seedling. You just get one plant that you're going to let grow out. You can call it your mother plant. This is going to get a very fat base over the next decade, ever increasing the pot size that you're growing it in. And all the side branches you straight away develop as bonsai as well. And only when they're nice and fat, maybe 2-inch, 3-inch side branches, you lay them off. Or you do like I do, and you take 1 or 2 years old, you layer those off, and you give them to your friends. But this is a nice way that you can use sacrifice branches to develop new bonsai. Keep in mind that the outside of the curve should be protected by a wire. So you can bend away from the wire, so the wire is on the outside of the curve. That way the risk of breaking out is a lot lower. And then gently you put these curves in. Now you don't have to bend this in one go. If you allow a little bit of time between the bends, you can ever increase the curve. Also, gently twisting the branch in the direction of the wiring curve helps protect the branch against breakage. You can see I'm going very, very slow because the branches are already quite brittle this late in the season. So it's better to do this earlier in the year. But this still works if you accidentally snap your branch. It just cracks. The bark peels off. What you can then do is add a droplet of liquid cut paste. So for this work I always have a tube of liquid cut paste at hand. It really is liquid, just like that. And you can just dab it on any wound that you might have on your tree. Now I'm not going to break a branch for you. I can show you what the cut paste looks like. You just go on with your tube and you say, okay, there's a crack there. I'll just let a little bit come out and I just dab it around the branch, right? And just like that. This way you will stop the drying out of the wound. The branch has a chance to recover. Now as you bend, you have to make sure that you do it in 3 dimensions, right? If you now look from this side, the viewing angle that you have, it almost looks straight. However, if I turn it a little bit, you will see that it is nice and fluidly bent. So what we do is we put an extra bend somewhere in this area, going up and back. Bonsai is a 3D sport, so basically you need to make sure the curves are 3-dimensional as you put them in. As you can see, I have just wired this one out as well, because I might layer this one off in the future, similarly to this one. So now I'm going to have to wire this one out. I'm using fairly thick wire early in the season, and I'm just gently laying it, wrapping it around the trunk. In a mass of branches it is sometimes difficult to find your way, so let's clarify something. This is the main trunk coming up, and here is a 3-way split, and I'm going to remove this back branch here. Don't really need it, and I don't want a thick swelling here at this point. And then I have this option to go into this as my next trunk line, into that as my next trunk line, or this one. And how do you then decide what the next segment is? Well, very easily, I look at the distance between the individual pairs of leaves. There's only buds forming here at the base of these leaves. Here in between, there's never going to be a leaf. That means Two things. First of all, if you prune just below the leaves, it will die all the way to the main trunk. People call this dieback, but it really isn't. It is just drying out of an area that doesn't have buds. And also, a new bud will never form. So I'm always going for the short internode distance, which means that the one in the back is never going to be the top. This one could be, but this has the shortest internodes per centimeter. So this is going to be my new top branch. Now, as you are bending it, you of course have the main shape of the trunk line that you want, which could be something like this. Nice, gentle, undulating shape. But within that, you can then start to put tiny little cross bends. This is a benefit of using very young material. You can put very small little bends in there, which help to add character later in the tree and doesn't look all that smooth. You can see these sort of shapes, quite irregular, right? Don't go for a spiral with ever finer movement. No, go for a little bit of a crazy shape, because that will make your most interesting bonsai afterwards. Put in tiny little awkward bends. A long winding spiral is okay, but then the tiny little bends in it make this trunk interesting. So there you go. The reasons why you should always wire out your sacrifice branches and your plants as you're growing them out, even though you don't think you'll do something with it. In summary, wiring out young branches means that you can also at the base get nice tight movement without breaking. If you then later on want to remove the sacrifice branch, you already have the start of a bonsai. In fact, you can grow this out to a size that it is already quite thick and you don't need to thicken out up the trunk all that much. Yeah, basically that's the main reason. Young branches bend easily. If they break and they don't break through, just a dab of cut paste. Just a dab of cut paste will help you heal that crack. And in a few months you can remove the wire, and in spring you can layer it off for the start of a new trunk. This was Jelle with an Arakawa Japanese maple that I'm wiring out so that I can use these as new trees.